In 1875, the British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli needed £4 million in less than 24 hours. The Suez Canal, the jugular vein of the empire, was up for sale by the Khedive of Egypt. If Britain didn't buy it, France would. Parliament was in recess. The state coffers were locked behind bureaucracy. Disraeli didn't go to the Bank of England. He sent a message to a private dinner party. Within hours, the money was promised. No armies were moved, no shots were fired, yet the geopolitical map of the world was redrawn over a glass of wine. That money came from the Rothschilds. For 2 centuries, this family has occupied the volatile intersection of private wealth and public power. They didn't just witness the birth of the modern world, they provided the mortgage for it. Long before the invention of stock markets or multinational corporations, human societies relied fundamentally on exchange. The earliest forms of writing, dating back to around 3200 BCE in Mesopotamia, were primarily practical tools for accounting. Clay tablets recorded debts of grain, silver, and labor, rather than poetry or law. These early ledgers illustrate a simple but powerful truth: trade has always been central to human organization. As societies evolved, so too did commerce. Standardized coins emerged in the first millennium BCE, enabling merchants to assign consistent value to goods and services, rather than relying solely on barter. By the medieval period, the complexity of trade demanded new innovations. Letters of credit allowed merchants to conduct long-distance transactions without physically transporting gold or silver, reducing risk and enabling faster trade. Italian banking houses, particularly in Florence, Venice, and Genoa, became hubs of international finance, connecting cities across Europe and beyond. The early modern era saw Europe become increasingly intertwined with the wider world. Trade networks expanded dramatically, linking Europe with the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Precious metals, spices, silk, and other luxury goods flowed into European markets, fueling wealth and curiosity. Financial tools evolved alongside these networks. Stock exchanges emerged in Amsterdam, Antwerp, and London, while joint stock companies allowed investors to share the financial risks of distant and uncertain ventures. Banking institutions began funding commerce on an unprecedented scale, creating the foundations of modern finance. Yet, despite these advances, Europe was not fully capitalist in the 17th and early 18th centuries. Mercantilism, the idea that global wealth was finite and that nations could grow only at the expense of rivals, dominated economic thought. States fought over colonies, trade routes, and monopolies, often resorting to military power. It wasn't until the late 18th century that thinkers like Adam Smith began to challenge this worldview, arguing that wealth could be expanded through production, specialization, and efficient markets, provided that people had access to capital to invest. It was into this rapidly changing economic and political landscape that the Rothschild family emerged, poised to navigate and shape the world of finance. The Rothschild story begins in Frankfurt, a relatively small but commercially significant free imperial city in what is now Germany. Frankfurt's importance stemmed from its location at the crossroads of European trade and its hosting of major fairs, which drew merchants and financiers from across the continent. The Rothschilds were part of Frankfurt's Jewish community, a group often restricted in residence, occupation, and property ownership. Throughout Europe, Jews faced widespread legal and social barriers. Land ownership and most guild professions were typically closed to them, leaving moneylending and finance among the few avenues for economic survival. While publicly condemned in many regions, moneylending was tolerated out of necessity, and those who excelled in it could wield remarkable influence. By the late 17th century, the Rothschild family had established a modest presence in finance. However, it was Mayer Amschel Rothschild, born in 1744, who would transform the family's fortunes. He came from humble beginnings, growing up in a crowded household with extended family. As a teenager, Mayer Amschel was apprenticed to a Jewish banking house closely connected to the rulers of Hanover. There, he mastered the mechanics of high finance, lending to governments, managing currency, and navigating the intersection of wealth and political power. Returning to Frankfurt, Mayer Amschel applied these lessons with meticulous discipline. He cultivated relationships with German princes and nobles, ultimately becoming the financial agent for William IX of Hesse-Kassel, one of Europe's wealthiest rulers. Crucially, Mayer Amschel controlled vast sums of money, not his own, but funds entrusted to him, a distinction that would become pivotal as Europe faced turmoil. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted, shaking Europe to its core. Monarchies toppled, republics emerged, and within a few years, much of the continent was engulfed in war. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, which lasted over 2 decades, devastated economies, redrew political boundaries, and drained the treasuries of states across Europe. Governments needed constant access to capital to fund armies, fleets, and alliances. Mayer Amschel Rothschild recognized that these crises created unprecedented opportunities for those able to move money efficiently, manage risk, and act decisively. Rothschild capital flowed where others feared to tread. Loans were extended, currencies exchanged, and smuggling networks bypassed Napoleon's continental blockade against Britain. The family's operations were remarkably nimble. When Napoleon dominated Europe, Rothschild resources still moved. When Britain resisted, Rothschild credit supported it. Ideology mattered little. They bet on continuity, not politics. By the time Mayer Amschel died in 1812, his personal fortune was substantial. Yet his most enduring achievement lay not in wealth alone, but in the system he built, a family enterprise structured, trained, and prepared to operate across borders. Resilient in the face of war and capable of shaping the emerging world of modern finance. His 5 sons, trained under his exacting standards, would carry this vision forward, transforming the Rothschild name into a symbol of international financial power. Rather than keeping the family business tightly centralized, the Rothschilds pursued a strategy that was both innovative and audacious for its time. Mayer Amschel Rothschild trained his 5 sons rigorously in the principles of finance, diplomacy, and risk management, then sent each one to a different European capital to establish a branch of the family bank. Frankfurt remained the core, a home base where the family's traditions, capital, and coordination hub were maintained. London became the center of Britain and global trade. It handled government debt, international payments, and the financing of empire. Paris focused on France and Western Europe, participating in post-Napoleonic reconstruction and industrial expansion. Vienna managed Austria and Central Europe, liaising with the Habsburg court and financing infrastructure, railways, and industry. Naples oversaw southern Italy, a region of political instability but emerging economic opportunity. Together, these 5 branches formed a private, transnational financial network that was unprecedented in scale and sophistication. In an era before telegraphs, newspapers, or rapid communication, the Rothschilds' internal courier system allowed information to travel faster between their offices than it did between many governments. Letters, bond prices, intelligence on political developments, and even military movements moved across borders with remarkable speed and secrecy. This network was not merely a convenience, it was a competitive advantage. During the final stages of the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschilds financed coalition armies fighting France. They coordinated massive transfers of gold, facilitated cross-border lending, and traded government debt with surgical precision. By the time the wars ended in 1815, Europe entered a reconstruction period. The Rothschilds were no longer just successful bankers, they had become indispensable to European finance. Among the 5 branches, London proved the most consequential. Britain emerged from the Napoleonic Wars as the dominant global power. Its navy controlled the seas, its empire expanded rapidly, and its industrial economy was entering a period of explosive growth. Yet the global empire required capital. Armies, colonies, railroads, and industrial enterprises all depended on money moving efficiently. Nathan Rothschild, who ran the London branch, became one of the most influential financiers in Britain. He managed government debt, traded gold, and stabilized markets during crises. One episode, which has become part of financial legend, illustrates the power of information. After the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Nathan reportedly learned of the outcome before many British officials and used this knowledge in the bond market. Whether the story is exaggerated or not, it reflects a fundamental truth. In the Rothschild system, timely information was as valuable as capital itself. Throughout the 19th century, the British government repeatedly relied on Rothschild loans. Railways, ports, canals, and colonial administration all required financing. Even social reforms depended on capital. For instance, when Britain abolished slavery in 1833, the government borrowed heavily to compensate plantation owners for lost property. Rothschild funds were part of this process, illustrating that finance underpinned not just commerce, but political and moral decisions. By the mid-1800s, the family was deeply embedded in British economic life, advising the Royal Mint, lending to governments, and shaping markets. Their influence extended into politics, society, and international affairs. The Paris branch followed a comparable trajectory, but with a distinct focus. After Napoleon's defeat, France sought to stabilize its economy and promote industrial growth. Railways, factories, urban development, and the nascent energy and mining sectors all required large-scale financing. The Rothschilds stepped in, providing both capital and credibility. They played a pivotal role in continental industry, funding infrastructure projects, supporting the new Belgian state after independence, and investing in mining, transportation, insurance, and publishing. In many cases, their involvement acted as a seal of approval for other investors. If the Rothschilds backed a project, it was considered safe and profitable. Their absence could raise doubts and reduce confidence. The Rothschild model, at its peak, was not about owning everything outright. Rather, it was about strategic positioning and decisive financing at key historical moments. They combined capital, information, and influence to shape markets, stabilize states, and accelerate industrialization. In doing so, the family became more than bankers. They became architects of modern European finance. The Naples branch, managed by Karl Rothschild, faced some of the most politically volatile terrain in Europe. Southern Italy was fragmented, economically uneven, and prone to rebellion. Yet, it also offered opportunities, particularly in government lending and infrastructure development, that required boldness and precision. Karl focused on state finance, lending to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies and helping fund public works, military campaigns, and early banking initiatives. He also invested in southern trade and ports, connecting Naples to broader Mediterranean commerce. While risk was high, so were rewards. Karl's success demonstrated the Rothschild approach in miniature, combined financial expertise, political acumen, and on-the-ground intelligence to create advantage where others feared to venture. While the other branches captured attention in London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, Frankfurt remained the organizational core. Nathaniel and Amschel Mayer Rothschild kept Frankfurt as the family's nerve center, coordinating the flow of capital, intelligence, and personnel across Europe. The Frankfurt office maintained records, handled correspondence, and ensured that the 5 branches acted in concert. It trained the next generation of bankers, monitored European politics, and managed investments in emerging industries. In many ways, Frankfurt functioned as the brain of a vast financial organism, while the other branches acted with local knowledge and initiative. Frankfurt ensured strategic coherence and long-term vision. By linking these 5 offices through couriers, letters, and financial instruments, the Rothschilds created something unprecedented, a private, pan-European financial network capable of moving capital, information, and influence faster than most governments could. Wars, revolutions, and economic crises were not merely challenges, they were opportunities to expand reach and consolidate power. The genius of the Rothschild 5 Arrows strategy was the combination of decentralization and coordination. Each son operated independently, mastering local conditions and building political connections. Yet all branches were integrated into a single, highly responsive system. Information flowed faster than official channels. Capital could be shifted across borders in response to opportunity or crisis. This network allowed the Rothschilds to finance armies, stabilize currencies, back infrastructure, and support industrialization simultaneously across the continent. By the mid-19th century, they became a private institution with global influence, long before globalization became a concept. Industrial projects and infrastructure, financing Europe's transformation. By the mid-19th century, Europe was undergoing a profound transformation. The Industrial Revolution had shifted economies from agrarian to industrial, creating massive demand for capital to fund factories, railroads, ports, and urban infrastructure. The Rothschilds were uniquely positioned to meet this need. In France, the Paris branch financed railways that linked Paris with provincial cities and ports, enabling the faster movement of goods, resources, and people. In Britain, London Rothschild loans supported industrial expansion, from textile mills to coal and iron production. Vienna and Frankfurt helped fund urban modernization and industrial ventures in Central Europe, while Naples supported infrastructure projects in southern Italy, including ports and roads. The Rothschild strategy was not mere philanthropy, they invested with precision. By providing capital at decisive moments, they facilitated projects that were politically sensitive, technically complex, or financially risky. Their backing reassured other investors, turning potentially uncertain ventures into viable enterprises. In many ways, they acted as the credit backbone of Europe's industrial expansion. Raw materials, coal, iron, copper, and later, precious metals, were the lifeblood of industrialization. The Rothschilds recognized that controlling the flow of capital to mining operations could yield enormous returns and influence. They financed mining projects in Austria, France, and Spain, often taking stakes in operations that extracted coal, iron, copper, and silver. These investments were strategic. They ensured that industries had access to the resources necessary for expansion, while also generating profits for the family. In France, the Rothschilds helped develop ironworks that fueled railways and factories. In Central Europe, they backed coal and metal mines that powered the Habsburg Empire's industrial ambitions. Their involvement in mining also illustrated a broader principle. The Rothschilds did not merely lend money, they integrated financing, logistics, and political connections to maximize both security and returns. By combining information, capital, and influence, they turned natural resources into engines of industrial and financial growth. Railroads were the arteries of industrial Europe, and Rothschild capital flowed into them early and decisively. Financing rail lines required enormous sums, coordination across regions, and confidence that investors could recoup their money over decades. The Rothschilds provided that confidence. In France, they funded lines linking Paris to major ports and industrial regions. In Britain, London Rothschild loans underwrote both national and colonial railway expansion. In Central Europe, Vienna financed lines that connected the Habsburg heartlands, improving trade and military logistics. In Italy, Naples branch investments helped integrate southern ports with northern industrial hubs. Beyond capital, the Rothschilds' network offered crucial operational advantages. Their ability to move information, coordinate cross-border investments, and stabilize currency flows reduced the risk for other investors. As a result, projects that might have been impossible in fragmented financial markets became feasible. Railroads were not just profitable, they were instruments of political and economic integration, and the Rothschilds were at the center of this transformation. Perhaps no innovation illustrates the Rothschilds' genius more than their development of the early international bond market. Governments in post-Napoleonic Europe frequently needed capital to fund armies, public works, and debt repayments. Selling bonds to private investors across borders was a challenge, requiring trust, networks, and expertise. The Rothschilds excelled in this arena. They bought government debt at discounted rates, helped issue new bonds, and sold them to investors across Europe. Their reputation made these bonds credible. If the Rothschilds backed a government's debt, markets trusted it. This created a new kind of financial ecosystem. States could access capital at lower costs, investors gained opportunities to diversify across countries, and the Rothschilds profited while consolidating influence. By the mid-19th century, their operations in bonds, combined with investments in industry, mining, and railroads, made them central actors in both public and private finance, a model of integrated banking that anticipated modern investment banks. Through strategic investments in industry, mining, railroads, and government debt, the Rothschilds did more than grow their family fortune. They reshaped Europe's economic landscape. Their network allowed them to direct capital where it was most needed, reduce risks, and accelerate modernization across the continent. They pioneered methods of international finance, developed mechanisms for coordinating cross-border investments, and demonstrated the power of combining information, influence, and money. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschilds had become indispensable not only to governments, but also to industrialists, entrepreneurs, and investors. Their influence extended from the mines of Spain to the railways of France, from the factories of Britain to the political courts of Vienna. They had effectively built the first modern, transnational financial empire, one that integrated banking, industry, infrastructure, and government finance in a way that had never existed before. Not every venture succeeded. The Naples branch struggled as Italian politics shifted. After Italian unification, Rothschild influence in the region declined. Competition also increased. New banks emerged. National financial institutions grew stronger. Still, the Rothschilds adapted. They expanded into commodities, including wine. They survived crises that wiped out lesser firms. When vineyards across France were devastated by disease, Rothschild estates endured, backed by deep reserves. Their wealth allowed patience, a rare asset in finance. Despite their immense power, the Rothschilds were not purely transactional. They believed wealth carried responsibility. During the Irish potato famine, they funded relief efforts when government action fell short. In Scotland, they supported emigration programs for displaced Highland communities. They financed hospitals, schools, and cultural institutions across Europe. Their Jewish identity also shaped their actions. As anti-Semitism surged in the 19th century, the Rothschilds supported Jewish communities and early Zionist settlements in the Ottoman-ruled Levant. They purchased land, funded infrastructure, and backed institutions that would later become part of Israel. This philanthropy did not erase controversy, but it complicates the simplistic image of ruthless financiers. By the late 1800s, the Rothschilds were at the height of their prominence. They held noble titles. They influenced governments. They financed global trade. They were also targets. Scientific racism, nationalist politics, and economic anxiety fueled anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The Rothschild name became shorthand in propaganda for shadowy power, a distortion rooted more in fear than fact. Financially, the world was also changing. The long depression of the 1870s hurt returns. New industries like oil introduced fierce competition. American capital began to rival European. The family remained wealthy, but the era of unmatched dominance was ending. The First World War shattered Europe. Empires fell. Borders dissolved. Revolutions erupted. The Rothschilds provided loans for reconstruction, but the financial landscape was harsher. Inflation, defaults, and political instability eroded old fortunes. Then came the Great Depression. In 1931, the collapse of Austria's credit bank, heavily associated with Rothschild capital, triggered a continental financial crisis. Extremist movements exploited the chaos. In Germany, the Nazis weaponized anti-Semitic myths, portraying Jewish financiers as enemies of the nation. When the Nazis seized power, Rothschild assets across Europe were confiscated. Family members fled or were arrested. Art collections were stolen. Businesses were dismantled. The dynasty survived, but at enormous cost. After the Second World War, the global financial center shifted toward the United States. Government regulation expanded. Central banks dominated monetary policy. The Rothschilds adapted again. They rebuilt banks, merged operations, and diversified. They remained influential, but no longer singularly dominant. Today, Rothschild companies operate globally, managing assets, advising governments, and investing quietly. The family no longer stands at the center of world finance, but it still occupies a respected place within it. So how should the Rothschilds be understood? They were brilliant organizers. They valued discipline, information, and long-term thinking. They understood that finance followed power and often preceded it. They were also extraordinarily lucky. The timing of their rise coincided with wars, revolutions, and the birth of modern capitalism. Above all, they understood one enduring truth: money shapes history not when it is hoarded, but when it moves at the right moment. The Rothschilds did not rule the world. But for more than a century, they helped finance the forces that did. And in doing so, they left a permanent mark on the modern age.